For 1,000 years, it stood unbreachable, the Theodosian walls. A marvel of military engineering, a triple-layered fortress of stone and brick that had mocked every invader who dared to test its strength. They had repelled armies, barbarians, and entire empires. Behind them lay Constantinople, the new Rome, the beating heart of an empire that had lasted for over 11 centuries. It was the queen of cities, a repository of ancient knowledge, Christian faith, and unimaginable wealth. But by the mid-15th century, the Byzantine Empire was a ghost of its former self, a withered body clinging to a single, magnificent city. The Black Death had ravaged its population. Centuries of civil wars and crusader sacks had drained its treasury and its spirit. Its emperor, Constantine XI, Palaiologos, ruled a city of empty palaces and forgotten glory, surrounded on all sides by a rising tide. He was a Roman emperor in name, but his empire was little more than the city walls and a few scattered territories. The once mighty eagle was now caged, and that tide had a new, ambitious leader, a 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II. He was brilliant, ruthless, and obsessed. He spoke multiple languages, studied ancient military campaigns, and was driven by a single, all-consuming dream. A prophecy attributed to the Prophet Muhammad himself had promised eternal glory to the commander in the army who would finally conquer Constantinople. For Mehmed, this wasn't just a military objective, it was his divine destiny. He was not just a conqueror, he was a man possessed by history. Mehmed knew that to breach the unbreachable, he needed a new kind of weapon. He gathered the best engineers from across his lands and beyond. One of them, a Hungarian engineer named Orban, had a radical idea. He had first offered his services to the Byzantines, but they couldn't afford his price. Mehmed, however, had vision and deep pockets. He told Orban to build him a cannon, not just any cannon, but the largest the world had ever seen, a true monster of bronze and fire. The result was the great Turkish bombard, or the Basilica. It was a terrifying spectacle. Nearly 30 feet long, it required hundreds of men and dozens of oxen to move it just a few miles a day. Its massive stone cannonballs weighed over 1,200 pounds each. The sound of its firing was said to be heard for miles, a thunder that shook the very foundations of the earth and the morale of the city's defenders. This cannon, and dozens of others like it, represented a fundamental shift in warfare. The age of walls was coming to an end. The age of gunpowder had arrived. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. Mehmed's army, estimated at over 80,000 elite soldiers, including his formidable Janissaries, stretched 4 miles outside the city walls. His navy of over 100 ships blockaded the Bosphorus. Inside Constantinople, the defenders were catastrophically outnumbered. Emperor Constantine could only muster around 7,000 men, a mix of his own soldiers, citizen militia, and a crucial contingent of foreign volunteers. Among them was a Genoese soldier of fortune, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a brilliant commander who would become the heart and soul of the defense. For weeks, the city endured a relentless bombardment. The great cannons pounded the ancient walls day and night. The ground trembled, and a constant cloud of dust and smoke choked the air. Each night, under the cover of darkness, the defenders' men, women, and children would desperately work to repair the breaches, using rocks, rubble, and wooden barricades. Their resilience was extraordinary. For every section of wall the cannons brought down, a new, makeshift defense rose to meet the next assault. The legendary walls were proving even more stubborn than he had imagined. He ordered his engineers to dig tunnels under the walls to plant mines and collapse them from below. But the Byzantines, led by a Scottish engineer named John Grant, proved to be masters of countermining. They dug their own tunnels, listening for the telltale sounds of Ottoman digging, and then either collapsed the enemy tunnels or met them underground in vicious, hand-to-hand combat in the pitch-black darkness. The most dramatic moment of the siege, however, happened on the water. The defenders had secured the entrance to their harbor, the Golden Horn, with a massive iron chain, preventing the Ottoman navy from attacking the city's weaker sea walls. It was an impenetrable barrier, or so they thought. Mehmed, in a stroke of audacious genius, decided to go over it. He ordered his men to build a massive greased wooden road, a slipway, over the hill of Galilee. In a single night, his men, with the help of thousands of oxen, physically dragged over 70 of his warships overland and into the Golden Horn. Imagine the horror of the Byzantines waking the next morning. Where there had been an empty, safe harbor, there was now an enemy fleet, ready to attack their most vulnerable flank. It was a logistical miracle and a psychological masterpiece. The morale of the defenders, already stretched to its limit, took a devastating blow. The noose was tightening. Despite this, they fought on. Constantine XI was everywhere, personally leading the defense on the walls, inspiring his men with his own courage. He was offered a safe escape from the city, but he refused. He would stand with his people and his city to the very end. He was the last Roman emperor, and he would die like one. As May drew to a close, the situation became desperate. Food was scarce, the men were exhausted, and the walls were crumbling. Strange omens were reported in the city. A mysterious fog, an eclipse of the moon, lights flickering over the great dome of the Hagia Sophia. To the terrified citizens, it seemed as though God himself had abandoned them. Mehmed, sensing the end was near, offered one final chance for surrender. The terms were generous. The emperor and his people could leave with their possessions, unharmed. Constantine's reply was defiant and heartbreaking. "To surrender the city to you," he wrote, "is not for me to decide, nor for any of its citizens, for we have all decided to die of our own free will, and we shall not spare our lives." The final assault was set for May 29th. The night before, a solemn and final Christian service was held in the Hagia Sophia. The great church, for one last time, was filled with people from all walks of life. Orthodox and Catholic, Byzantine and Genoese. They put aside their differences and prayed together, united in their shared doom. Emperor Constantine gave a final, moving speech, asking his people to be ready to face martyrdom. Then, he rode to the walls to take his place among his soldiers. At 1:30 in the morning, under a sky lit by torches and the glow of fires, the attack began. Tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers, wave after wave, threw themselves at the battered walls. The noise was apocalyptic, the roar of the cannons, the blare of trumpets, the crash of siege engines, and the screams of thousands of men. The first waves were irregular troops, sent to exhaust the defenders. Then came the disciplined Anatolian regiments. The fighting was savage, hand-to-hand combat on the broken ramparts. 4 hours, the defenders held. Led by the heroic Giustiniani, they repelled every attack. But then, disaster struck. Giustiniani was gravely wounded by a cannonball fragment. His men, seeing their leader fall, carried him away from the front line. His departure caused a panic, a moment of hesitation in the defense. At that same moment, a small group of Janissaries noticed that a small, unguarded gate, the Cucaporta, had been left unlocked. They poured through. Simultaneously, other Janissaries, using scaling ladders, managed to gain a foothold on the top of the main wall. They raised the Ottoman standard. The sight of the enemy flag flying from their own walls shattered the last remnants of the defenders' resolve. The Ottoman army surged into the city like a flood. Emperor Constantine XI, seeing that all was lost, threw off his imperial insignia and charged into the sea of oncoming Janissaries, his sword flashing. He was never seen again. His body was lost in the chaos, a fittingly anonymous end for the last heir of Augustus and the Roman Caesars. What followed was 3 days of horror. The city was sacked, its treasures looted, its people enslaved or slaughtered. Ancient libraries were burned, churches were The great city that had been a beacon of civilization for a millennium was extinguished in a storm of violence. On the afternoon of the first day, Sultan Mehmed II rode into the conquered city. He went to the Hagia Sophia, the grandest church in Christendom, and ordered it to be converted into a mosque. As he stood beneath its magnificent dome, he reportedly recited a Persian couplet. The spider weaves the curtains in the palace of the Caesars. The owl calls the watches in the towers of Afrasiab. A new era had begun. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was more than just the end of a siege. It was a turning point in world history. It marked the definitive end of the Roman Empire, an institution that had shaped the Western world for nearly 2,000 years. It established the Ottoman Empire as a dominant world power, shifting the balance of power from Europe to the East. The Greek scholars who fled the city brought with them a wealth of classical knowledge that helped fuel the Renaissance in Italy. The story of 1453 is a tale of two leaders: a tragic, noble emperor defending the last embers of a dying flame, and a young, brilliant sultan forging a new empire in its ashes. It's a story of incredible courage, technological innovation, and the brutal, world-changing consequences of a single 53-day siege. It's the story of how the medieval world died and the modern world was born.
To truly feel the weight of the fall, we must first understand what was lost. The Byzantine Empire wasn't just some successor kingdom, it was the Roman Empire. When Rome itself crumbled in the west, its eastern half, with its magnificent capital Constantinople, endured for another 1,000 years. For centuries, it was the wealthiest, most advanced, and most dazzling civilization in all of Christendom. A beacon of light while much of Europe was in the so-called Dark Ages. But the story of Byzantium is one of tragic, slow decay. Catastrophic plagues wiped out huge portions of its population. The Fourth Crusade, a betrayal by fellow Christians, sacked its capital and broke its spirit. And from the east, relentless pressure from rising powers, especially the Seljuk and later the Ottoman Turks, chipped away at its borders. Imagine a grand, sprawling tapestry, and then watching, thread by thread, as it unravels over generations. By the dawn of the 15th century, the once mighty Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. The empire was little more than the city of Constantinople itself, a few islands, and a sliver of land in Greece. It was a vulnerable jewel in a decaying setting, surrounded by the vast and ambitious Ottoman Empire. On the throne sat Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos. History remembers him as a capable, brave, and deeply pious man. But he was inheriting a throne teetering on the brink of utter collapse. His army was tiny, a few thousand dedicated but exhausted soldiers. He had a handful of loyal allies from Genoa and Venice, brave men who came to defend Christendom's bastion. But mostly, he had a desperate, fervent faith that God would not abandon the city of Constantine the Great, the new Rome, the city of the Caesars. This city wasn't just a place, it was an idea, a 1,000-year legacy, and its fate now rested on the shoulders of one man and his handful of defenders.
Across the Bosporus, a storm was brewing. A new kind of ruler had ascended to the Ottoman throne. Sultan Mehmed II, soon to be known as Mehmed the Conqueror, was nothing like his predecessors. Imagine a young man, sharp, intense, driven. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a scholar, fluent in multiple languages, a voracious reader of history and science. His heroes were Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and he saw himself as their successor, the rightful heir to both the Roman and the Islamic worlds. And in his mind, one city stood as the ultimate prize, the key to unlocking this grand destiny, Constantinople. Mehmed knew that conquering this legendary city required more than just ambition. It required innovation. It required a weapon that could shatter the unshatterable. His ambition found its instrument in a man named Orban, a brilliant but opportunistic Hungarian engineer. Orban was a master of cannons, a craftsman who sold his deadly skills to the highest bidder. He had actually offered his services to the Byzantines first, but they couldn't afford his price. So he went to Mehmed. The Sultan asked him a simple question: can you build a cannon powerful enough to break the walls of Constantinople? Walls that have stood for 1,000 years. Orban's reply was legendary. The stone from my gun could reduce to dust the very walls of Babylon. That was all Mehmed needed to hear. He gave Orban unlimited resources, whatever he asked for. It was his. The result was a true monster of a cannon, nicknamed Basilica. It was the largest, most terrifying piece of artillery the world had ever seen. Picture this: a bronze tube nearly 27 feet long, so massive it took a team of 60 oxen and hundreds of men just to drag it across the land. It fired colossal stone balls weighing over half a ton. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a psychological tool, a symbol of Mehmed's unyielding will. As this beast was slowly, painstakingly hauled towards Constantinople, it was clear that this siege would be different. The ancient world was about to collide with a new age of gunpowder in the most explosive way imaginable. In early April 1453, the final nightmare for Constantinople began. Sultan Mehmed II arrived, and he didn't come alone. His army, a colossal force of over 80,000 elite soldiers, Janissaries, and auxiliaries, stretched 4 miles, a sea of tents and steel encamped before the legendary land walls. At the same time, his massive fleet, hundreds of warships, blockaded the Sea of Marmara. Constantinople was completely surrounded. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI could only muster a tiny fraction of that number. Estimates vary, but he likely had around 7,000 men, a mix of his own Byzantine soldiers, Genoese mercenaries, and Venetian volunteers. 7,000 men to defend a grueling 12-mile perimeter of walls. The odds weren't just long, they were astronomical, impossible. But Constantine and his defenders weren't without hope. Their faith was placed in God and in the seemingly impenetrable Theodosian walls, the greatest fortifications of the medieval world. For 1,000 years, they had stood unbreached. The Byzantines had another clever trick up their sleeve. To protect the city's weaker northern sea walls along the natural harbor known as the Golden Horn, they deployed their secret weapon, a colossal iron chain, stretched across the mouth of the inlet. This massive barrier made it impossible for the Ottoman navy to enter. For a moment, it seemed like a brilliant checkmate. The Ottoman fleet was stuck, bobbing uselessly in the Bosphorus. But Mehmed wasn't just a conqueror. He was a genius of logistics and unorthodox thinking. When faced with an obstacle, he didn't try to break it. He went around it. In one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history, Mehmed ordered his ships to be taken out of the water. His engineers constructed a roadway of greased logs, stretching 4 miles over the hill of Galata. Then, using thousands of men and oxen, they literally dragged his fleet overland, behind the Genoese colony and directly into the Golden Horn, completely bypassing the chain. Imagine the defenders' faces, waking one morning to see Ottoman sails unfurling in their protected harbor. It was a stroke of strategic brilliance that was psychologically devastating. The noose was tightening, and the last glimmer of hope was beginning to fade. Inside the city walls, despair began to creep in. Food was becoming scarce, and the constant bombardment from Mehmed's super cannons was taking its toll. Then came the omens. The citizens, deeply religious and superstitious, started seeing signs of their impending doom. One evening, a thick, unnatural fog, a phenomenon unheard of in that region at that time of year, descended upon the city, completely enveloping the great church of Hagia Sophia. When the fog finally lifted, the people looked up in horror. The ethereal lights that always seemed to glow from the dome, what they called the light of the Holy Spirit, had vanished. The lights were out. To the terrified populace, the message was clear and chilling. God had abandoned them. Their divine protection was gone. With their harbor breached and their faith shaken, the defenders of Constantinople prepared for the end. This was another battle. It was the end of an era, the death of a 1,000-year-old empire, and the dawn of a new age. So grab your popcorn, because this story has everything. Towering walls, giant cannons, a boy sultan with a burning ambition, and a city fighting for its very survival. Let's set the stage. By the mid-15th century, the Byzantine Empire, the once mighty Eastern Roman Empire, was a shadow of its former self. It was basically just the city of Constantinople and a few scattered territories. But what a city it was. Protected by legendary triple-layered walls, it had withstood countless sieges for over 1,000 years. It was the jewel of the Christian world, a repository of ancient knowledge and culture. But across the Bosporus Strait, a new power was rising. The Ottoman Empire, and at its head was a young, brilliant, and utterly ruthless Sultan, Mehmed II. From the moment he took the throne, Mehmed had one obsession: to conquer Constantinople. It was a strategic prize, a symbol of immense power, and for him, a divine destiny. He famously said, "I want only one thing. Give me Constantinople." To breach the unbreachable walls, Mehmed needed a super weapon. He found his answer in a Hungarian engineer named Orban. Orban had originally offered his services to the Byzantines, but they couldn't afford his price. Big mistake. Mehmed, on the other hand, gave him unlimited resources. The result was the Great Cannon, a monstrous piece of artillery over 27 feet long, capable of firing a 1,200-pound stone ball over a mile. This was the game changer. In April 1453, Mehmed's massive army, numbering somewhere between 80,000 and 200,000 men, surrounded the city. Inside, the defenders were hopelessly outnumbered. Led by the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, they had only about 7,000 soldiers, including a crucial contingent of 700 Genoese mercenaries under the command of the brilliant Giovanni Giustiniani. The odds were staggering, but their spirit was unbreakable. The siege began. For weeks, the great cannon bombarded the walls. The sound was so loud it could be heard for miles. Each shot was a laborious process, but each impact shattered stone and hope. The defenders, led by Giustiniani, fought back heroically, repairing the breaches each night with wood and ruble. Mehmed threw everything at them. Frontal assaults, tunneling miners, even a siege tower. But at time, the defenders, fueled by desperation, held the line. Then, Mehmed pulled off one of the most audacious moves in military history. The Byzantines had blocked the entrance to their Hagia, the Golden Horn, with a massive iron chain, preventing the Ottoman navy from attacking the city's weaker sea walls. So Mehmed decided to go overland. He ordered his men to build a greased wooden road, and in a single night, they dragged 70 of his warships over a hill and into the Golden Horn, completely bypassing the chain. The defenders woke up to the sight of an enemy fleet in their protected harbor. The psychological blow was immense. Even with this setback, the city held on. The defenders fought with the courage of lions, but supplies were dwindling, and the men were exhausted. The constant bombardment was taking its toll, not just on the walls, but on their morale. Emperor Constantine XI fought alongside his men, a true leader to the very end, inspiring them with his own bravery. Finally, on May 29, 1453, Mehmed ordered the final all-out assault. The attack came in waves. First, the irregular troops, the Bashbazaks, were sent to tire out the defenders. They were followed by the disciplined Anatolian regiments. The defenders repelled them both, but they were exhausted. Then came the elite, the Janissaries, the Sultan's personal guard, the best soldiers in the Ottoman army, advanced with a terrifying determination. The fighting was brutal, hand-to-hand on the crumbling ramparts. The turning point came when Giovanni Giustiniani, the heart and soul of the defense, was mortally wounded. His evacuation from the walls caused a panic among the remaining defenders. At the same time, a small group of Ottomans found an unlocked gate, the Kirka Porta, and raised the Ottoman flag on the tower above it. Seeing the enemy flag flying inside the city, the defense collapsed. Chaos erupted. The Ottoman soldiers poured into the city. Emperor Constantine XI was last seen casting off his imperial regalia and charging into the fray, disappearing into the sea of attackers. He was never seen again. A heroic death for the last Roman emperor. What followed was 3 days of brutal pillage, as was the custom of the time. The great city, the queen of cities, was plundered. When Mehmed the Conqueror finally rode into Constantinople, he was struck by its beauty, even in its ruined state. He went to the Hagia Sophia, the grandest church in Christendom, and ordered it converted into a mosque. It was a powerful symbol. The old world was gone, and a new one had begun. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across Europe. It marked the definitive end of the Roman Empire and the Middle Ages. It also spurred the Age of Discovery, as Europeans sought new trade routes to the east, now that the old ones were controlled by the Ottomans. The legacy of 1453 is immense. It reshaped the map, shifted the balance of power, and changed the course of world history. It's a story of incredible ambition, technological innovation, desperate courage, and tragic defeat. The city, renamed Istanbul, would become the glorious capital of the Ottoman Empire for the next 450 years. The walls that fell that day still stand, a silent testament to one of history's most epic sieges. What do you think was the most critical factor in the city's fall? The cannon Mehmed's genius, the sheer numbers. On May 28th, a strange, eerie silence fell over the Ottoman camp. For the first time in weeks, the cannons stopped. Sultan Mehmed II had announced a day of rest and prayer, a final spiritual preparation before the all-out assault that would decide the fate of an empire. He gathered his elite Janissaries, the heart of his army, and made them a promise. Limitless plunder, the riches of the world's wealthiest city, and eternal glory as conquerors of the legendary Constantinople. He painted a vivid picture of a city ripe for the taking, stoking the fires of their ambition and religious fervor. Inside the besieged city, a very different kind of preparation was underway. The mood was somber, filled with a sense of impending doom. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last Roman emperor, presided over a final, heartbreaking Christian service in the magnificent Hagia Sophia. Orthodox and Catholic defenders, who had been at odds for centuries, stood side by side, their differences melting away in the face of a common existential threat. The great church, which had stood for 1,000 years, was filled with the sound of prayers and weeping. It was a mass for the dying, a farewell to a world that was about to disappear. After the service, Constantine mounted his horse and rode to the walls one last time. He moved among his weary soldiers, men from every corner of Christendom: Greeks, Genoese, Venetians, He offered words of encouragement, but his own resolve was clear. He reportedly told his commanders, "The city is fallen and I am still alive." A grim acceptance of his fate. He had no intention of surviving the fall of his capital. He was an emperor, and he would die like one, sword in hand, defending his people to the very last breath. Then, as darkness completely enveloped the land, the silence was shattered. The night of May 28th gave way to the early hours of May 29th, 1453. A terrifying symphony of war, drums, trumpets, and cymbals erupted from the Ottoman lines. A deafening roar designed to break the spirit of the defenders before the first man even charged. Torches and fire arrows lit up the night, revealing the terrifying scale of the attacking force. Mehmed's grand, final assault had begun. The first to be sent forward were the Bashabazauks. These were irregular troops, a motley collection of soldiers from across the empire, poorly equipped but numerous and expendable. Mehmed threw them at the walls in massive, disorganized waves. Their purpose was simple and brutal: to absorb the first volleys of arrows and cannonballs, to tire out the defenders, and to die in droves, clogging the moats and creating pathways for the more valuable troops to follow. For 2 grueling hours, the defenders fought them off, a desperate, bloody struggle on the ramparts. The Bashabazauks were repelled, but they had done their job. The defenders were already weary, their ammunition dwindling. Next came the second wave, the disciplined Anatolian troops. These were professional soldiers, better armed and organized. They advanced with scaling ladders, focusing their attack on the heavily damaged sections of the Theodosian walls, particularly near the Lycus River Valley. Here, the fighting became even more intense. The air was thick with the smoke of gunpowder, the clash of steel, and the screams of the wounded. The defenders, led by Emperor Constantine and the Genoese commander Giovanni fought with the courage of despair. They pushed back ladders, hurled Greek fire, and met the attackers hand to hand. Once again, they managed to hold the line, pushing the Anatolians back. But the cost was immense. The defenders were now reaching the absolute limits of human endurance. They had been fighting non-stop for hours against fresh waves of enemies. It was at this precise moment of exhaustion, just as the first light of dawn began to streak the sky, that Mehmed played his final, decisive card. He unleashed his elite, the Janissaries. These were the best soldiers in the world, a force of slave soldiers raised from childhood to know nothing but discipline, loyalty to the Sultan, and the art of war. They marched forward not in a chaotic charge, but in a solid, disciplined line, their advance relentless and terrifying. They were fresh, rested, and filled with a fanatical desire for victory. They were the hammer blow meant to shatter the already cracked defenses. The Janissaries hit the weakened section of the wall with overwhelming force. The exhausted defenders, who'd already fought off to massive assaults, now faced the ultimate test. It was here, in the heart of this final, desperate struggle, that two fateful events occurred almost simultaneously. In the chaos of the battle, a small postern gate, a sally port known as the Kirkoporta, was discovered to be unlocked. Accounts differ on how this happened. Some say it was left open by accident after a scouting mission. Others suggest treachery. Regardless of the reason, a small group of Janissaries found it. They poured through the opening, quickly overwhelmed the few guards, and raised the Ottoman standard on the tower above. The sight of the enemy flag flying from inside their own walls sent a wave of panic through the ranks of the defenders on that section of the wall. At almost the same moment, a far more devastating blow struck the heart of the defense. Giovanni Giustiniani, the brilliant Genoese general, who had been the backbone of the entire defensive effort, was severely wounded by a cannonball fragment or a crossbow bolt. The projectile pierced his breastplate, and he collapsed in agony. The injury was grievous, and his men, seeing their seemingly invincible commander fall, insisted on carrying him from the front lines to a ship in the harbor. His departure, at the most critical moment of the assault, was catastrophic. The sight of their leader being taken away shattered the morale of the remaining Genoese troops. Panic and confusion spread like wildfire. They thought he was fleeing, and their will to fight simply evaporated. The defense crumbled. The Janissaries, seeing their chance, surged through the widening gaps in the line. Emperor Constantine, realizing the end had come, threw off his royal insignia and, with his last loyal guards, charged into the oncoming tide of enemies. He was last seen fighting near the gate of St. Romanis, disappearing into the melee, a final act of defiance. He died as he had lived, the last emperor of Rome, fighting for a lost cause. With the emperor gone and the walls breached, the city was lost. Ottoman soldiers poured into Constantinople from multiple points, and the centuries-old defense of the Queen of Cities finally broke. For 3 days, as was the custom of the time, the city was given over to the victorious army. The great city of Constantine, the bastion of Christendom for over 1,000 years, had fallen. The morning of May 29, 1453, marked the end of an era and the dawn of a new one. The Middle Ages were over, and the Byzantine Empire was no more. The end was swift and brutal. For over 1,000 years, the great walls of Constantinople had repelled every army that dared to assault them. But on May 29, 1453, a date that would echo through history, the impossible happened. The Ottomans were inside. The city's defenders, a tiny, exhausted force of Greeks and Genoese, had fought with the courage of lions, but they were simply overwhelmed. The Kirkoporta gate, a small postern left unlocked by mistake, became the city's undoing. Once inside, the elite Janissaries, the Sultan's personal troops, fought their way to the main gates, tearing down the imperial standards and flinging them open from within. A torrent of Ottoman soldiers poured into the city, a flood that could not be stopped. What followed was the beginning of the greatest pillage in history. For 3 days, the city that had once been the jewel of the world was subjected to unimaginable chaos. The streets, once alive with the commerce and culture of a vibrant empire, ran with blood. People screamed, desperately trying to flee or find a hiding place. But there was nowhere to go. The sounds of fighting echoed through the narrow alleys, as pockets of resistance were brutally crushed. Families were torn apart in the maelstrom. It was the apocalyptic end of a civilization, a nightmare made real in the heart of what was once the center of the Christian world. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last man to hold the title of Roman Emperor, understood the moment had come. He had spent weeks leading the defense, fighting alongside his men on the walls, inspiring them with his bravery. He had refused all offers to flee the city, vowing to die with his people and his empire. Now, as he saw the Ottoman banners rising on the towers and heard the triumphant shouts of the invaders echoing from every direction, he knew all was lost. In a final, defiant act, he tore the purple imperial regalia from his shoulders. He didn't want to be captured and paraded as a trophy. He was an emperor, but he would die as a soldier. With his last loyal companions, He drew his sword and charged headfirst into the sea of oncoming Janissaries. And then he vanished into the chaos, swallowed by the battle. His body was never definitively identified. Constantine XI, the 109th Roman emperor since Augustus, died as he had lived, defending his city to the very last breath. While the city burned, Sultan Mehmed II, now forever known as the Conqueror, made his grand entrance. He rode his white horse through the streets, not with the fury of a looter, but with the quiet pride of a man who had achieved his life's greatest ambition. Since he was a boy, he had dreamed of this moment, of capturing the city that had haunted the imagination of Muslim rulers for centuries. He wasn't just conquering a city, he was fulfilling a prophecy. His destination was not the imperial palace, but the spiritual heart of the Byzantine Empire. The Hagia Sophia, for nearly 1,000 years, this had been the largest church in Christendom, an architectural marvel that was said to have been built by angels. When Mehmed arrived, he found the massive cathedral packed with terrified citizens. Thousands of men, women, and children had fled there, believing the ancient prophecies that an angel would descend with a flaming sword to save them at the last moment. They huddled together, praying for a miracle that would never come. As Mehmed dismounted and walked through the great bronze doors, a profound silence fell over the crowd. This was the moment of truth. What would this young, ambitious conqueror do? His character was a complex mix of ruthless ambition and intellectual curiosity. A warrior who was also a patron of the arts and sciences. That complexity was on full display in his very first actions. He saw one of his own soldiers furiously hacking at the priceless marble floor with an axe, eager for plunder. Mehmed stopped him immediately. "Be content with the booty and the captives," he commanded. "The buildings of the city are mine." The great church was not to be destroyed. It was to be preserved as his prize. He then walked to the great altar, and in a deeply symbolic act he picked up a handful of earth and sprinkled it over his turban, a gesture of humility before God in his moment of ultimate triumph. He then ordered an imam to ascend the pulpit and recite the declaration of faith. With that, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom, was converted into the Hagia Sophia Mosque, the grandest in the new Ottoman capital. The cross was taken down and replaced with the crescent. The 1,000-year history of the Byzantine Empire had officially ended, and a new era, the age of the Ottoman Empire, had begun. Upbeat, historical documentary-style music begins. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most pivotal events in world history. The Fall of Constantinople in 1453. This wasn't just another battle. It was a 53-day siege that literally redrew the map of the world, ending a 1,000-year-old empire and kickstarting the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery. So, grab your popcorn, because we're about to journey back to the 15th century, to a city of legendary walls, giant cannons, and clashing empires. We'll meet the two brilliant and determined leaders at the heart of this conflict. The last Roman emperor, Constantine XI, and the ambitious young Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, later known as the Conqueror. How did a 21-year-old sultan manage to breach the most formidable defenses in the medieval world? And what incredible stories of bravery, betrayal, and innovation unfolded during those intense 53 days? We'll explore it all. Let's set the stage. By the mid-15th century, the once mighty Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of the Roman Empire, was a shadow of its former self. It was basically just the city of Constantinople and a few scattered territories. Think of it like a majestic old lion, still proud, but surrounded by younger, hungrier predators. The city itself, however, was a fortress. For over 1,000 years, its legendary Theodosian walls had repelled countless attacks. These weren't just single walls. They were a complex, multi-layered defense system with moats, outer walls, and massive inner walls dotted with towers. To anyone in the medieval world, they seemed absolutely impenetrable. Inside these walls lived Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos. He was a brave and competent ruler, but he inherited a desperate situation. The empire was bankrupt, its population had dwindled, and its military was tiny. He knew a massive threat was looming just across the strait, That threat was the Ottoman Empire, a rising superpower that had already conquered most of the surrounding territory. And leading them was the young, brilliant, and utterly obsessed Sultan Mehmed II. From the moment he took the throne, Mehmed had one goal: to conquer Constantinople. For him, it was a strategic necessity, a religious calling, and the ultimate prize to cement his legacy. Orban was a master cannon founder, and he had an idea for a new kind of weapon, a super cannon, a bombard of unprecedented size and power. This cannon, along with dozens of other large artillery pieces, would be the key to Mehmed's strategy. A few hundred brave Genoese and Venetian soldiers came to fight, most notably the skilled soldier Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, who would become the hero of the defense. But in the end, Constantine faced the Ottoman horde with a tiny army of only about 7,000 men. The stage was set for an epic showdown. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. The thunder of Mehmed's great cannons echoed across the Bosphorus. Day after day, the massive stone bowls slammed into the Theodosian walls. The defenders, led by the tireless Giustiniani, worked frantically. Under the cover of darkness, they would rush out to repair the damage, using barrels of earth, wood, and stone to patch the breaches. It was a brutal, exhausting cycle. The psychological toll was immense. The constant roar of the cannons, the shaking ground, the knowledge that the walls that had protected their ancestors for centuries were slowly crumbling it was terrifying. Yet, for weeks, they held on through sheer grit and determination. Mehmed grew impatient. The walls were damaged, but not broken, and his army was taking casualties. He needed a new angle of attack. The city's northern harbor, the Golden Horn, was protected by a massive iron chain that blocked the entrance to enemy ships. This was a critical part of the defense. Several major Ottoman assaults were beaten back with heavy losses. The defenders fought with the courage of desperation, but their numbers were dwindling, and they were exhausted. Giustiniani, the heart and soul of the defense, was gravely wounded by cannon shrapnel. His evacuation from the walls was a devastating blow to morale. It felt like the last hope was gone. Sensing the moment was right, Mehmed planned one final, all-out assault. On the night of May 28th, the Ottoman camp fell silent, a calm before the storm. Inside the city, the people knew the end was near. In a poignant final act, Emperor Constantine XI, along with Catholic and Orthodox Christians, gathered in the magnificent Hagia Sophia for one last service. It was a moment of unity in the face of annihilation. After the service, the emperor went to the walls to command the final defense, knowing he would not survive the day. At dawn, on May 29th, the final assault began. Waves of Ottoman troops crashed against the walls. The first two waves were thrown back, but the defenders were at their absolute limit. Then, the elite Janissaries, Mehmed's personal troops, entered the fray. A small group of them discovered a small gate, the Kirkaporta, that had been accidentally left unlocked. They poured through, raised the Ottoman flag on the walls, and the defense collapsed. Chaos erupted. Emperor Constantine XI, seeing the end had come, reportedly cast off his imperial insignia and charged into the fray, disappearing into the sea of fighting, a true last Roman emperor. The Fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves across the world. It marked a definitive end to the Roman Empire, a continuous civilization that had lasted for over 2,000 years. For the Islamic world, it was a triumphant fulfillment of a long-held prophecy. For Europe, it was a terrifying wake-up call. The main overland trade route to Asia was now completely controlled by the Ottomans, forcing European nations to seek new sea routes. This directly sparked the Age of Discovery, as explorers like Columbus and Vasco da Gama set sail to find new paths to the east, inadvertently discovering new continents and changing the world forever. Mehmed II made Constantinople his new capital, renaming it Istanbul. He didn't see himself as the city's destroyer, but as its successor, a new Caesar. The great church of Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque, a symbol of the new order. The city where East met West for centuries had witnessed the end of one era and the dramatic, violent birth of another.